Okay. Boker Tov. Today's daf is presents certain challenges, so we'll go slowly to try and I don't know if we'll go slowly, but we'll try and do the best we can. So today's Daf Yomi is Daf Chav Ches 28. We'll go back to the top of Chav Zayin Amabeis 27b in order to really try and understand it. So we're on 27b around 9 lines from the top. Amar Rav Huna Marav, that Rav taught Shnei Achayos Yevamos. So let's say there were two brothers, and each was married to two sisters, and the two brothers died. Let's say Reuven and Shimon. Shenafu Ifnei Yavam Echad. So two brothers were married to two sisters, and they Shenafu Ifnei Yavam Echad. So and they fell before a third brother. Let's say his name was Levi. Cholatz lo Rishona, and if Levi does, so these two sisters have a zika with each other. So so rabbinically, we're going to say you're not allowed to be married to one, because if you're married to one, then you have a zika with the other one. You're not allowed to have a zika with the sister of your wife. So therefore, we say cholatz rishon on that. But once Rav says once you do chalitza with the first wife, you no longer have a zika with her. Let's say the first woman who fell to you in Yibam was Rachel. You no longer have a zika with her, and then Hutra. So therefore, under those circumstances, once you do chalitza with her, she's allowed to marry because it's just a rabbinic zika. Therefore, she requires chalitza before marrying, because it's just rabbinically that she's prohibited to you as achos sekukaso. Chalitza shniya, once you do the chalitza with the second one, hutra, then the second one could marry into the marketplace. Mesa rishona. Let's say the first one died. So therefore, under those circumstances, he no longer has. Then there's no longer a zakuka between two sisters, because the first one is deceased. So therefore, under those circumstances, what we're going to say is mutar b'shniya. Then he can now marry the second one. The ein tzarach omar meisa shniya mutar b'rishona. And for sure, if the second sister, let's call her Leah, if she died, you're allowed to marry the first one. Why? Because the first one is a different category than the second wife, because Mishum Dahavya, the first one was considered a Yevama Shehutra the Nezra v'Chazra v'Hutra. And the first one was a case of a Yevama, this woman, she was initially permitted, i.e. Rachel was initially permitted because her husband died before Leah's husband died. And so at that point, she just fell to Yibam before Levi. She wasn't the sister of anyone who also fell to Levi and Yibam. So she was Hutra, and then she became prohibited, and she returned, and she became permitted again. So therefore, Tachzor le'heter rishon, she goes back to her first initial state. But Rav says not only is that case permitted, but also the case of where even the first one died, and then the second one, who had never been in a state of permission, also is able to be married. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, Mesa Shniya Mutter Barishona. Rabbi Yochanan says that if the second one died, meaning to say, again, they're two sisters, Rachel and Leah. So he says if Leah, whose husband died second, if she died, Mutter Barishona, then Rachel becomes permitted again. Aval Mesa Rishona, but if Rachel died, Asher B'Shniya, the second one does not become permitted. So what's the reason why if Leah died, Rabbi Yochanan says Rachel becomes permitted again? Because he says, because when Leah falls to Yibam, Rachel was already alive, and Rachel had already fallen to Yibam, and she was her sister. So therefore, Leah was always prohibited because of the connection she had, that both she and her sister had fallen to the same man in Yibam, and they're sisters. And Rabbi Yochanan's of the position, Kol Yevama she'ein ani koreh ba b'shas nefila Yevama yavo aleha harezu ka'ishes ach she'ish labanim v'asura. Any woman that I can't say about her the verse that at the moment she falls to Yibam, she's permitted. About such a woman, I'm going to say she's like the wife of a brother who was not alive at the same time as the other brother, who always remains prohibited to the new brother who was born. Means if she wasn't permitted at the time that she felt a yibum, she can't become permitted later. That's the concept that Rabbi Yochanan is introducing. Gemara says, "V'Rav Leislei Haisvar." Doesn't Rav also agree with that position? V'Amar Rav Kolisha Sheinani Korah Babashas Nefila Yevami V'Olei Arei Ke'eshesach Sheish Al Banim V'Asura. Doesn't Rav say the same idea? Gemara says, no. Rav would say that Hanimile Hechot Dekai Ba'apa Isur Achos Isha D'Oraisa. Rav would only say that idea by a biblical law. But here, by it's a rabbinic law, Rav wouldn't say that. Rav would say that since she was only prohibited rabbinically at that time, Leah was only prohibited rabbinically, therefore she's going to be permitted once Rachel dies. So the Gemara says, let's challenge this position of Rabbi Yochanan. Really, Rav says it also, but it's even against Rabbi Yochanan, it's a question. We challenge from our Mishnah. Let's say you have Arba Achen. Let's say you have this case of 4 brothers. And of these 4 brothers, Shnayim Mehem Nisuim Beis Achios. 2 of the brothers are married to 2 sisters, right? So the first case we were talking about had 1 brother, 3 brothers, and 1 brother survived. But now we have 4 brothers. 2 were married to 2 sisters. And the 2 the 2 brothers married to 2 sisters died. So there we say, they do chalitza. These ones do chalitza and not ibum. V'amai, why do they have to do chalitza? Why won't we say like Rabbi Yochanan said? Let's say have one of the brothers get up and do chalitza with the woman who fell to ibum second. With the Ave Rishona, and then the first one will be Gabi Idoch, Ki Yevama Shahutra V'Nesra V'Chazar V'Hutra. Then the first one will be like the case of this Yevama, who was initially permitted before her sister fell to Ibam, and now she became prohibited once her sister fell to Ibam. And now you do Chalitza with the first one, she becomes permitted again. Tachsor L'Teira Rishon. Let her now become permitted again. Amrulay, no. Rabbi Yochanan says, you know what? It's a radical statement. He said, Achios Eini Yodea Mishanan. I don't know who taught this Mishnah. I can't attribute it to anyone. It's not what he's not exactly arguing with the Mishnah, but he's saying, I don't know who taught it. A strange phrase. So I'm trying to remember where else I saw that phrase in the Talmud. I don't know who taught it. I don't know. Somebody could correct me. Do a Google search, but I don't remember this phrase. He's saying, I can't place this Mishnah, I can't place its positions. Gemara is going to say, wait, Rabbi Yochanan, why does he have to resort to this radical answer? There are at least 10 answers that he could have given to try to figure out how to understand this Mishnah. Why don't he say as follows? My choltos. Why don't he say when it says that they have to do chalitza, what does it mean? Nami dikatani. Meaning to say, what does it mean, choltos? It means they also, meaning to say, when it says my choltos, what does it mean? Nami dikatani choletzes chada. Why doesn't it just mean that one of them does chalitza? Meaning do chalitza with the second one, and the second one who fell to Yibam, and then you can marry the first one. You do Yibam with the first one. The Gemara says, no, choltos katani. No, it says plural, that you do chalitza with both. So he doesn't give that answer. My choltos, maybe say, well, no, what does a choltos mean? Choltos to Alma. In general, the second one does chalitza. The Gemara says, no, we don't want to say that because it says, Hare elu katani. It says these ones do chalitza. So now the fourth approach, or I don't know if it's the third or fourth. Anyway, the other answer says, so why don't we say meaning say, why don't we say the answer is that if he had come along and done chalitza with the first one who fell to Ibam first, then the second one has no choice, then you have to do chalitza with the second one. So why don't we give that answer? That's what the Mishnah is talking about. Where it says no, choltos, which means lechatchila katani, which means that lechatchila katani, meaning to say that it's not because we're fixing the fact that he made a mistake in the chalitza with the first woman first. No, it's lechatchila. There's no other choice here, but you have to do chalitza to both of them. Another answer, another approach. I'm on top of 28a. Hold on. Gezerah Doma Kadam Lecholotz Rishona Bereisha. Maybe what happened is that we're saying that he can't do this, that he has to do chalitza with both of them because we're concerned that maybe he would have done chalitza with the first one, with the woman who fell to Yibam first, and then he can't do Yibam with the second one because she was always prohibited. So maybe that's what this whole gezerah is about. So, and that's why they say they both have to do chalitza, because it's a gezerah. Maybe you'll come to do Yibam with the second woman. The Gemara says, Yevamos katani. No, he doesn't want to take that approach because it says he does not do Yibam, meaning to say the Leko din Yibam hachakal. There's no law of Yibam here at all. Another possibility. Maybe we're saying, no, we don't want to allow him to do chalitza with the second woman first because we're concerned that maybe then the first woman, then we're concerned that maybe at that point, like we said earlier, that in the case of two brothers, that if the first one has done Yibam and then the second brother dies, then you can't do anything with the other brother, with the other woman, and you've lost the opportunity to do Yibam or Chalitza. So maybe that's what we're concerned about. It's a Gzera Shema Yamos, and maybe it's part of that decree, and we're not allowed to lose this opportunity to do the mitzvah of Yibam. So Gemara says, no. Rabbi Yochanan is not concerned about the sudden death of the second brother. Rabbi Yochanan Misalo Chayesh. He doesn't want to give that approach because that's not his concern about a sudden death. Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer, but maybe why don't we say that our Mishnah is following the position of Rabbi Eliezer? Rashi says the position of Rabbi Eliezer in Parak Beis Shammai on Daf Kuf Tes, where Rabbi Eliezer's position was, who says, Kivan Sha'amdalav Sha'achas Be'isur, Maybe Rabbi Yochanan, why doesn't he just say, oh, our Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says that if you're ever prohibited at one time, then you remain prohibited forever. Then since this woman was prohibited at one time, she remains prohibited forever. And Mara says, no, he doesn't want to say that because he just say for Rabbi Eliezer, because the next line in the Mishnah says Rabbi Eliezer says that remember we said in the Mishnah on Chavav Amid Aleph, we said Rabbi Eliezer Omer Beis Shammai Omer Mikayim Beis Hillel Omer Myotzia. The Beis Shammai says that you remain in the marriage if they went ahead and married. So that was Rabbi Eliezer citing Beis Shammai. So when the fact that the Reishas, the Sefer is Rabbi Eliezer, the first clause is not Rabbi Eliezer. Otherwise, they would have just said it. They wouldn't have said Rabbi Eliezer says. Well, maybe what we're talking about here is the reason why he doesn't allow chalitza on the second one is because they both fell to Yibam at the exact same time. And so therefore, we're not going to know how to do chalitza to the second woman because they both died both their husbands died at the same time. And this follows the position of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, which is a topic appears in Gemara and Bechoros as well, who's of the position that the Evshar Samson, that it's possible that two things can happen at the exact same time. Gemara says, no, we wouldn't. Our Mishnah would not want to be an anonymous Mishnah like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. His position is a minority position. So lo sasamon tanak Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Our position would not want to be. Our Mishnah would not want to be like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Gemara says, well, why don't we say, okay, fine. We don't want to say that it's possible they both came out at the same time, but maybe we won't know which one came first. And so therefore we don't want to do chalitza with the second woman to allow us to do yibam with the first woman. Gemara says, no, if that's the case, that we don't know which one happened first, well, when the next line in the Mishnah says, that if they went ahead and they married, you should force them out. Bishlam Rishona, I understand if they went ahead and married the first one, the Bishlama, it makes sense to say Rishon, that the first one who married Amrina Leiman Sharilach, you could say to him, who allowed you to do this marriage? Because the first one's supposed to get chalitza, El Shnia, but the second one, Amar, you could say Chavrai Shnia Yavam, Ana Rishona Yavam. The second one, my friend, meaning my other brother, he did Yibam with the second one, and I'm doing it with the first one. I mean, say I'm okay. He did the mistake, but I'm okay because once the second one was released, that means the first one is not the achos kukoso anymore, and so therefore I'm allowed to do yibum. So therefore, since we could we if that's the case, we would never have been able to apply this phrase as kadfu kansa yotziu. So we see from here it doesn't make sense. And Hainu de Amrway, that's why Rabbi Yochanan said this Mishnah is we say about it achayos eni odem mishanan. I don't know who taught it. It doesn't fit into any position. Okay, so now we learned also in the Mishnah it says that if they went in and married, well, we have this principle: if the two brothers fall to two sisters, if two brothers are married to two sisters, and they fell in yibum to two brothers, that we don't do. They fall to yibum, we don't do yibum because they're both achos sukukaso. So neither one can do yibum, so they do chalitza. But if one of them was an erva to one of the brothers, let's say Rachel and Leah are sisters, and the two surviving brothers are Levi and Yehuda, but Rachel is also Levi's mother-in-law, let's say. So Levi can't do yibum with Rachel, and so therefore he actually, ironically, is just connected by a zika with Leah, and so therefore he can do yibum with Leah, but Yehuda still has the zika between the two sisters, and so therefore he's prohibited to be with both of them. And so therefore, so the Gemara says, okay, let's look at this phrase. If one of the brothers prohibited by this called this prohibition of an erva, let's say the case we're talking about that Rachel was the mother-in-law of Levi, he is prohibited to be with her. Levi is prohibited to be with Rachel, but he's allowed to be with her sister. Whereas the second one, Aser B'Shteim, is prohibited to be with both of them because they are what's called the Achos Zukukosa. That they have both of them have a zika with Yehuda. So the Gemara says, we assume that first the nafla chamoso tchila. So the initial assumption is that Rachel felt the yibum first with Levi, and if that's the case, v'amai, why do we say that Yehuda can do yibum with Rachel? Leiku chasam liyabim hach de'ena chamoso. Why don't we say that Levi gets up and does yibum with Leah because she's not his mother-in-law, and that's okay. That's okay. And so now Rachel, with respect to Yehuda, is kiyavama shahutra v'nesra v'chazar v'hutra. She was prohibited, but now she became permitted again. And Rabbi Yochanan said clearly she should be allowed under those circumstances. So tachzor rishon latera rishon. So why don't we say that? So Amar Papa. Yeah, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about going to nafla hach de'ena chamos operation. No, what happened was the one who fell to yibum first was Leah, and so therefore that's the reason why we don't say that approach, because Rachel wasn't the first one to fall to yibum. Okay, Rebbe Lezer says the name of Rebbe Lezer says that Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai says that Yikaimu, that if they went ahead, the two brothers went ahead and did yibum with each of these sisters, that you can allow them to maintain it. Beis Hillel says Yotziu. Beis Hillel says we force them to leave. And Shimon Omer Yikaimu. Shimon says we can maintain, and Abba Shaul Omer Kawaya lehem Beis Hillel b'davar zeh. Beis Hillel was more lenient in this matter. That Beis Hillel says that for them to terminate the marriage. Beis Shammai Omer Yotziu. Beis Hillel Omer Yikaimu. Beis Shammai says terminate the marriage. Beis Hillel says you can maintain it. So Rabbi Shimon, come on, who is Rabbi Shimon ruling like? Ika Beis Shammai. If it's like Beis Shammai, well, that's exactly what Rabbi Elazar said. Ika Beis Hillel, I know Abba Shaul. So who is he holding like? So the Gemara says, no, Hachi Kamar. This is what it means. Say, Nechku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, whatever said. Beis Shammai Beis Hillel are not arguing on this matter. Okay, so now we say, a lot of this next stuff is going to be repetitive of pages we did earlier, but those pages were exceedingly difficult, so it's fine to repeat them. If one of these sisters was prohibited by an Easter erva, then he's prohibited to be with her and he's allowed to be with her sister, but the second one remains prohibited to both of them. So the Gemara says, but didn't we already have this exact case, or we had a very similar case. Achosa kashi Yevamasa. We had this on Daf Chaf, the sister that she is the Yevama. Sometimes she could do chalitza, and sometimes she could do yibum. She could do yibum where one of the sisters, where she was an erva to one of the brothers. Whereas tzricha, we need in both cases. The yashmin and hasam. If we just had that case earlier, mishum deleko lo megzar, mishum sheni, because there's only one surviving brother, so therefore we don't have to make concern that if she does yibum with one, that you might come to also do even with the second one. That maybe the second brother also do yibum with the second sister. I might have thought we're not going to allow the erva one to also do yibum with the other brother. And if we just had this case of the one of the two sisters, I would say that what's the reason why we allow one of them to do yibum? Because there's a second sister that proves that in general, you don't do yibum. But in that case, where there's only one surviving brother, maybe we say we're not going to allow, because then in general we would think that there's also zika, there's also yibum by achasukukaso. So therefore we need both cases. So then the Mishnah said, if they were prohibited, in this situation, if these two sisters, if these but it says if there was a prohibition of the sisters to each other by an Isur mitzvah of Isur kedusha, and if the prohibition was Isur mitzvah, we say was a rabbinic erva, and Isur kedusha is a prohibition from the Torah, but it's not a kares prohibition. So then we said under those circumstances they don't do chalitza. They do chalitza, not yibum. So the Gemara says, didn't we also learn this in the Mishnah, or on top of Chav Chasam and Beis? Isur mitzvah, Isur kedusha, if it's a prohibition that's rabbinic, or if it's just a regular prohibition, choletzes v'lomis yabemes. Meaning to say, what does it mean, Isur mitzvah? Rashi says, if one of the surviving sisters was prohibited to the other one by, let's say, rabbinic prohibition, let's say she was his grandmother, then he's not going to be permitted to do yibum with his sister, because biblically speaking, since they have a connection of yibum, then there's still zika between the two sisters, and so therefore she requires chalitza. So but we already had this case, so says the Gemara. So we've already had this case. So what's the difference? The Gemara says no. Hasam Isur mitzvah l'chud. There was just a prohibition of rabbinic prohibition, rabbinic erva. Hacha Isur mitzvah v'achosa. Here it's both. There's a rabbinic prohibition, and also the fact that she has a connection with her sister to the same man, a zika to the same man with her sister. You might have thought Laikam Isur mitzvah b'makom Isur erva. That you might have thought that since she has this rabbinic erva, that she could do yibum with the surviving brother. Kamash Malan. So we see from here that she can't do it. That it's just a rabbinic erva, and so therefore she doesn't allow the other sister. It's not going to be enough to allow the other sister to do yibum. So the Gemara says, "V'tisyadim, you're really going to allow her sister to do yibum on the basis of her rabbinic prohibition with one of the Yevamos. Since biblically speaking, she really falls to even with this third brother, or let's call him Levi. So therefore, if you're going to allow Levi to do even with her sister, it's a biblical zika. So it's a biblical problem. Giving the Araisa, because biblically speaking, she falls to even with him. So the Gemara says, no, you might have thought, since it's just a rabbinic prohibition, you might have thought, Misham mitzvah, the rabbi said that you should fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum, and because since it's just a rabbinic prohibition, you should fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum and allow Levi to do Yibum with Leah. And so therefore but we're not going to say that. The reason why we don't allow it is because there's a biblical prohibition here. There's a biblical erva. It's not a biblical erva. So the Gemara says, if one of them, if one of them was prohibited to one by Isur Erva, and let's say Rachel was prohibited to Levi by Isur Erva, and Leah was prohibited to Yehuda by an Isur Erva, then they can each do Yibum with the other brother. So the Gemara says, but this case also, Hasu Amali, Hainu Hach. This is exactly the same as the case where one of the brothers was an Erva. What's it adding? The Gemara says, no, Malicha. The Gemara asks, Malicha, Malitre, what's the difference if it's one brother falls to Yibum or two? The Gemara says, Tricha, we need both cases. The Yashmin and Hasam, because if we just had the case of one brother, Mishum, then we're going to say Mishum the Ikashain the Muchach. Because then the second surviving brother who's not the Yibum, he proves that if it's not a case of Yibum, that if there's a case of Erva, you could do Yibum. But here in the other case where there's not a second brother who doesn't do Yibum or Chalitza, maybe we would have said Eimalo, maybe there's nothing to prove it. So and if we would say that it's just this case of the two brothers, I would say Adarabba, Travail Muchachia Adadi. So both of them prove that the other one is capable of being married only to this person. Avo Idach, whoa, but the first cause where it was just one of them was permitted to marry, even though the other one is prohibited to both, I would say since there's not two people, each one proving about the other one, it's possible that we make a decree. Maybe you're going to say you're allowed to do Yibum to the Achos Kukasa. So, and she's not, and we would say she can't do Yibum, so therefore it's Tzricha. We need both cases. So then the Gemara quotes our Mishnah. Zui Shamro, this is what the rabbi said. This is the sister. When she's a Yevama, she could sometimes do Chalitza or sometimes Yibum. If it's a case where one of the brothers is an Erva to one of the sisters, then the other sister can do Yibum, otherwise do Chalitza. The Gemara says, Zui Lamiyute Mai. What's when it says this is the case, what's it coming to exclude? Lamiyute Isser Mitzvah Azev, Isser Mitzvah Azeh. It's to exclude the case where they have an Erva, but it's a rabbinic Erva. So then they have to do Chalitza and they can't do Yibum. Gemara says, well, if that's the case, that's essentially what we just taught. Hainuach. So the Gemara says, no. Malichan, Malitrek. Gemara says, what's the difference if it's one or two? Gemara says, no. Mal the Tema. You might have thought, Kivor Amrina and Uki Isar Mitzvah, V'Malkam Isar Erva. Then when do I not say that when do I not say that prohibition of a mitzvah comes in the place of the prohibition of an erva, where you have to be concerned to make the decree because of the second brother, where you don't have to make the decree because of the second brother, then under those circumstances, because if maybe in the case where you don't have to be concerned about the other brother doing Yibum when he's not supposed to, then I would say, okay, each one could do the Isser Mitzvah and Makom Erva. And they do the Mitzvah of Yibum. Kamashal, we don't say that. So now the Gemara is going to cite the words of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, and we already had this Gemara on Daf Tes, and it was very, very hard then. And we'll repeat it now, but it's basically essentially repetition. So we already had this. Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav, V'chein Tani Rabbi Chia B'kulon Ani Korba, and referring to the 15 cases of Erva in our Mishnah, the opening Mishnah, Masechas Yevamos, it says, by all of them I could say, Asur Lazeh, Muteris Lazeh. By all of them I could say, the one is prohibited to this, one is permitted to that. One, V'achosa Kashi Yevamasa, Ochoetzes Homus Yabemes. He says, by all of them I could say that the one who's prohibited to this one can also be permitted to this one, meaning to say that all of them, there's two sisters, I can figure out where one of them is an erva, and thereby she could do yibum with the other one, and the other one is prohibited and has to do chalitza. But ve'achosa k'sheyivamasa, And then the sister, who is the Yevama, either does chalitza or yibam. So I can explain all of these scenarios related to our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda mitargim mechamos of elef. And Rabbi Yehuda said when he explained this position in the name of Rav, Rabbi Yehuda mitargim, that Rav and Rav Chia's words were only said about the final 6 cases of the about the final 9 cases of the Mishnah, not the first 6. But the first 6 cases of the Mishnah, he wouldn't say it. My timer. Kivan the Bito, since the daughter, which is the first case that is listed in the Mishnah, that can only happen this way. But the onsin, who the mishkachas like, can only happen in the case of ones. And b'nisuin lo mishkachas, it can happen in the case of marriage. It can only happen in the case outside of marriage. B'nisuin can marry. So Rav Yehuda says that our Mishnah is referring to marriage, and so therefore the onsin can marry, not referring to cases outside of marriage, and so therefore we're not going to list these cases. And so, by the remember when we did this on Daf Tes, on Abayis, there's a very, very, very long Rashi working out all these cases. Where Abaye says, Af Bito me Anusa. So Abaye says, no, I can also do these cases from the daughter from the Anusa, giving them Ashkuchosh Mishkachas La Ibaya Ba'onsin Tahavi. He says we can have these cases also there. But this case of the wife of the brother that was not alive at the same time, in that case, I can't find a source for in our Mishnah. Given that Aliba de Rabbi Shimon who mishkachasla, Aliba de Rabbanan who mishkachasla, Plukta Kamari. That case can only occur according to the position of Rabbi Shimon. Remember, but not according to Rabbanan. And we don't have a dispute with our Mishnah doesn't deal with disputes. Remember, we already talked about the dispute between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan. Rabbi Shimon says about this brother who was born after the fact that we're going to say he's only prohibited. Remember, we saw this dispute between Rav Oshia and Rav Papa also earlier in our Gemara. The Rabbi Shimon says, when do we say this brother was born after the fact is prohibited? Only when he was born before the widow of the first brother who was not alive with Rabbi Shimon, before she actually did yibum with the second brother. But if he was born after that fact, then it would be permitted. So since this case only can occur according to Rabbi Shimon, therefore we don't have it. For Rav Safra Matargim, Rav Safra explains it, that even this case, the brother of the wife, the wife of the brother who was not alive at the same time, Mishkachasla, we can have the situation of prohibited to this one, permitted to this one. We can have it with this case of 6 brothers, according to Rabbi Shimon. Remember, we had that case earlier. And we had this there now already, which was the top of Yud Amid Aleph. Meis Noad V'Yava, Meis Noad V'Yavan. And we discussed this case at length earlier, so we're going to do it quickly here. That Reuven and Shimon Nesuyin L'Shtei Achos, like the situation where Reuven and Shimon were married to 2 sisters. Levi Yehuda Nesuyin L'Shtei Nachros, and Levi and Yehuda were married to 2 non-sisters. And Meis Reuven, and then Reuven dies, and Noad Yisachar V'Yavam Levi, and then Yisachar is another brother was born. We'll call him Yisachar, and after that Levi does Yibam, and then Meis Shimon, and then Noad Zvulun. V'Yavam Yehuda, Meisu Levi Yehuda B'Labanim, and then Levi Yehuda died without any sons. V'Navluhu Kamei Yisachar and Zvulun, and under those circumstances, the law is Asuras Lazeh Muteras Lazeh, Asuras Lazeh Muteras Lazeh V'Achosa She'Yivamasa. So the Gemara says, why do we have to say we're talking about 6 brothers? Lamali Yavam Yehuda. Why do we have to say that we're talking about 6 brothers? And Yehuda did Yibum with the wife of Shimon after the birth of Zevulun. Below Yibum Yehuda Nama Mishkachasla. You can even have it without Yehuda doing Yibum. So Gemara says that the reason why Rav Safra says this case of 6 brothers is Mishum Tzara, because there's the Chiddush of the co-wife. That even though the wife of Yehuda, the first wife, was prohibited to Zevulun after Yehuda did Yibum with Leah, the wife of Shimon, because of the co-wife. So the Gemara says, well, Tzara the Tzara Ma'iko Meimar. This applies to the co-wife. What about the co-wife of the co-wife? So the Gemara says, Kagon Dahadar Ve'vimu Nami Gad Va'asher. Okay, we're going to stop here. I know I did this part really quickly at the end. Most of it we had done earlier, but I also want to start with the next Mishnah. starting tomorrow. So therefore, I wanted to go through so we can start the next Mishnah Chasam Beis. What I do highly recommend is that people review this several times before this 7.5 year cycle, that before we come to it next time, so that God willing, when we come to it next time,